Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. As Andrew just mentioned, for those of you who weren't able to attend our intro session, we will be recording these sessions so that you can refer back to them afterwards. We are very happy to have you all here today, this morning. So we hope that you have your cup of coffee, your tea, and that you're ready to learn something hopefully practical that will add value to your business. So today, the topic will be, in this session, the economy and my business. Now, it serves a little bit as an intro to a little background to understand like why we're in this situation, but also try and make it practical and to provide some practical solutions to your actual business. So who am I and what's the context? What's the context of all this being talked about today? So myself, I'm a business coach and venture advisor, consultant to businesses for Allia. I have various different retail experience from mainly like the sector of shops, cafes, restaurants, and event management, having run my own business for 5-6 years in a restaurant setting, and then 5 years before that, mainly in events and things like that. I also now I'm focusing more on online. So the online experience, web app creation, website building is something that I've always been interested in. So if that's something that you need help with, then we can also speak about that in our one-to-ones. And I think that when you get to know me today, maybe in our one-to-ones, you'll see that I like to look at things maybe from a practical angle. So I'm always kind of troubleshooting and trying to find solutions to your problems and to my own business problems. So I always like to look at things from a practical perspective as a business owner. So I hope that we have that in common. The business that I run today is called The English Grocer. It's a British food exporter. So I definitely feel the pinch in terms of the cost crisis as the cost of goods has gone up, the cost of fuel has gone up. So no, definitely I can relate to what's going on as a business owner like yourselves. I'm also an MBA candidate at the Warwick Business School, so I'm working as well to expand my knowledge of business in general and try and make all the learnings I can and deliver those back to all the participants that I work with across our various programs. So any tips or tricks that I'm learning there, I pass on where relevant. I would love it if you could get in touch. The best way to reach me would be by email. So that's maxwell.fuller@allia.org.uk. You can reach me anytime on that email. We can schedule time together. And like I said, the craft resource bank that we introduced earlier will be available where you can book a one-to-one session with any of the Allia business coaches and myself. But if you have any questions outside of those more structured sessions, please feel free to email me directly. So what we'll be covering today in today's 1-hour session together, we have the drivers of inflation and really why is this happening right now in the economy, trying to understand what we can do to make this better and understand how did we get here, basically. Then, of course, where we are now, or where did we go, and what the government and council is really doing about this. What are the measures? What are the up-to-date measures that they're putting in place for this? And what can you do about it? How can you be practical? I introduced the concept of being practical about these things. What are maybe the actions that you can take to benefit from this inflationary pressure? And how can you position yourself? And of course, just after this session with me today and the whole session with Allia, the support doesn't end there. So there are further resources available to you after being with us today. Okay, so the drivers of inflation. We're here today to discuss and introduce the drivers of these rising costs and why it's important to pay attention to what's happening now in the economy and where we can go from here in terms of running a business on a day-to-day basis and how we can step away from our business and try and understand why this is happening and see where to go from there. So inflation itself is a constant. So it's something that we need to get used to and remind ourselves about. And this is something that I'll be talking about in the next few slides. But these creeping costs that we've been seeing have been coming for years and years. So we've been, by definition, in an inflationary pressure environment. The causes of this, of course, are varied. So we have different things that have caused this to happen. But it's basically, we have to be aware that the economy that we live in and we subscribe to is designed in this way. So we have to understand that this is a game that we are forced to play. Unfortunately, we cannot so much separate ourselves without alienating our customers and our customers' needs. We have to be aware of what's happening for our customers, for us, and it's the environment that we live in. So, of course, the drivers of inflation go from, the most common that you might have heard of is money printing, introducing new money into the economy, devaluing our current money, and those are the creeping costs, the savings being eroded, obviously. But there's other forms of inflation. So there's the cost push inflation and demand pull inflation. So cost push inflation can be the rise in commodity prices of any types of materials that you buy, but also demand pull inflation, where might be higher demand and lower supply, like we saw during the COVID crisis. So these drivers of inflation can be driven as well by reality of the COVID supply chains, raising energy prices and labor prices like we know them. So here what we have is we have a little bit of a graph to see where we are in terms of inflation. So the cumulative inflation has been over 100 times since 1971, which is crazy when you put it in perspective, that we basically had money that was worth less now than it was before. So this is just a little thing to put that in perspective and to be aware that every year there is that inflation that is happening. So it's very rare to have any form of deflation. And we've only seen this about twice in the last 2 decades. It's more likely that entities like the Bank of England and other central banks worldwide will put in place measures to slow down inflation and keep the wheels turning than to combat any deflation. And this is really how the economy is designed, by introducing new money into the economy. This is called deficit spending, and it's something that's really been put in place since the 1930s. So the UK was actually one of the first countries worldwide, before the US. I think it was 2 years before the US, that abandoned the gold standard and went towards a deficit spending economy, where they would basically be printing more money. And that transition completed, so that was between 1931 and 1971. And that was mainly financed to be able to finance things like the wars that we had. And after that, I think it was really the capitalist system that kind of took over. And this is something, like I said, even as a small business owner, you have to be aware of, because this is the game and the environment that we're playing in globally. It's not just happening here at home. It's really how most of the world's economies are operating. So since 1971, where the pound was devalued 125 times over, this is just a quick little example to show you, for example, the housing prices. So we might hear on the media, on the news, that home prices are skyrocketing, etc. So there's 2 ways to look at this, obviously. So there's the nominal house price, which is really like the price you're paying. But then there's also the real house price. So that's relative to inflation. So it's very important that you put things in perspective, though even with inflation, we've seen that, let's say, in 1950s, the home price the base was 100,000. It's still 2-3 times that now due to inflation. So housing is a good example, I would say, in terms of where people tend to want to park their money, but at least that's a bit more protected from inflation than just your savings and just having cash in the bank. So nowadays, what we do is we use, of course, in England, the pound sterling, and that's expressed relative to other currencies. And that makes it a bit more complex to understand because you can say, well, what is the pound worth? Well, you always have to put the pound relative to another currency to really understand its worth, since we're not pegged to gold or anything else. So you have to compare basically. Uh, it's pretty tough in FX and foreign exchange. You have to compare apples to oranges sometimes with different monetary policies, different economies and geopolitics that are in play. So the most common currency to compare it to would be maybe the US dollar, because a lot of purchases that are for imports into the United Kingdom are priced in US dollars. Let's say if you're buying goods from China or even from the US or South America, the international economy, a lot of it is priced in US dollars. So you can see here that at different times of either geopolitical conflict or through different times, in a period since the 1970s, we've had a devaluing pound. So we've gone from $1 is £2.60 down to all the way 125. And this is because we've had various events, such as the US putting up its interest rates, making its economy more valuable, more attractive. And then we've had the reduction of US interest rates, which makes it less attractive. Then you've had different wars and financial crises. And throughout this time, there's been more and more money printing by both the US and the UK. Like I said, so it's relative, but there's been these shifts in what we call capital flows. So movements of money from banks, privates, and nonprofits, pension funds, and just the global markets overall that really can affect the movement of the pound. And the pound is our currency, and it's our store of value. It's how we recognize value. But if other countries don't recognize that value, then they will be selling off our pound, and in exchange, they'll be buying another currency, such as the US dollar, the euro, and so on and so forth. So it's very important to take a step back from your business and say, wow, okay, there's all these geopolitical factors at play. There's the invisible hand of the economy at play as well, which will really take a big impact on my small business. And it's sometimes hard to think about that because we're just running our business on a day-to-day basis, and we don't actually have time to always follow the news, or we get fear-mongered by the news system, by the media complex, so to speak. So it's very important to kind of have that economic understanding and relate that to your business so that you can use it to your advantage. So as we can see, when the pound goes on sale, then it costs more for us basically to import our goods and services from abroad. And we seem basically more cheap to the outsiders, people who are maybe not using the pound. But then at the same time, we won't be as attractive to invest in if we don't show that confidence. So as small business owners, we have, as a collective, a big voice to share, and we must show confidence, I would say, in the economy. So I mentioned two types of inflation before, but there's also something called stagflation, which is basically what we're at the risk of going into, where we might start to see higher unemployment rates. We are living in a period of higher inflation, but of lower growth. So as costs of goods and services have gone up, unfortunately, due to COVID and the war in Ukraine, so on and so forth, we're at risk of now, because of the price of goods and services rising, people need to have higher wages. We might be at the risk of having a higher unemployment rate. So this is, again, something to be aware of. So we've had demand pull, cost push inflation, but we have to also be aware that the stagflation could be around the corner. So if the outlook is not very stable, outsiders will lack any confidence to invest. And where there's this lack of confidence, then the economy will begin to slow down. So it's our collective responsibility to be positive and to put in place the right leaders in our government to show that confidence. So what does that look like today? Excuse me, I'm just, there we go. Okay, just checking my chat box. So what does that look like today? So right now, shockingly, we have 11.1% inflation figures. And this is staggering when you take that number out of the blue. And it is something that is quite high, but it's not something that was necessarily unusual to see in the past, maybe before our time. I'm around 30 years old now, and but my parents, who are in their 60s, have seen higher levels of inflation than this. So this is just an important thing to take that perspective, that this is not an unusual occurrence. We've seen it in this economy before, though it is a little bit out of the norm, and it's a bit concerning when we have all these other factors at play. So the current inflation of 11.1% is really characterized by this huge jump we've seen here. So in the period after the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, we did see minor deflation, where the CPI, the prices remained around 0% growth year over year. But now what we've seen is, because we've hovered so low, possibly between this 0 to 2% in terms of the prices of goods and services, then we've had this built up pressure, like a pressure cooker. And we've been borrowing a lot of money, and we've been using a lot of leverage. And now it's time that that money be really accounted for and is being represented in also the higher prices that we're seeing now, with all the COVID relief money in America, all the quantitative easing which takes place, which is literally the bailouts, the handouts, the checks in the mail type of thing. This is where we're seeing now this huge jump in inflation. So the Bank of England's target rate was traditionally around the 2% level, and now they're having actually to revise that a little bit higher, because they're saying, well, we're at 11% now. We're going to try and put in place these measures to reduce it, but we're going to see an average probably increase in these consumer prices still going forward. So here we can see, in terms of the UK inflation, since the time of the mid-1970s, we've seen this crazy inflation before. We have seen inflation to the levels of 18% year on year. And this is really characterized by the different peaks and troughs we can see here on the graph. So you can see that this is a quite steep jump, I would say, this year. But we have seen big jumps before. So it's just important to say that, yes, in the 2000s, things were stable, so on. But then, we've had the financial crisis, we've had a few different events occur, which have led us now basically to where we are today. And we can see that inflation is prominent everywhere, but affecting us basically at home now a lot because of this maybe stagflation type of environment. So where are we seeing inflation exactly? Now, we say 11.1% overall, but where is it being really, where's the effect taking place the most? So the steepest increase has been in housing, water, electricity, gas, and fuels. We all know about those headlines, of course. But we have also areas which have not seen as much inflation. So depending on maybe what goods and services you're buying, how you obtain those goods and services, what goods and services you might be consuming, they might be seeing different levels of inflation. And I think that's a very important point to make, because often we fear monger a lot by sticking, oh, we have a lot of inflation, the cost of everything is going up. Well, yes, the cost of everything is going up, but some people are maybe taking advantage of that and raising their prices. And some people might have to follow along with it and also raise their price, because we're in this unfortunate cycle where goods and services go up, we have to pay people more, and we might have to see a little bit more unemployment in the horizon. Excuse me. So really here, inflation is hitting us most at home. We're really seeing that the cost of these primary materials in terms of electricity, gas, and fuels is where we're seeing the most. But also in the cost of food, obviously, because like countries in the Ukraine, where they're the big producer of a lot of sunflower oils and wheats, that's a big primary good input for all our services. So it's an unfortunate cycle where things actually compound, but it's just good to put it in perspective that different sectors might be seeing inflation in different ways. So if you're in one sector, you might be suffering from extreme inflation at home or in your business. Or if you're in a different sector, you might just be seeing more mild inflation, and it might catch up later as well. So to be prepared for that. So, like I said, why is this all happening? Um, Obviously, we have massive delays in supply chain and disruptions as factories have been closed in China and across Europe during COVID. So we had this big backlog. Um, People who wanted to order electronics suffered from this, or cars, primary goods and services. Everyone was affected by these delays and so on. But it's very important to note that this is still happening as well. So I'm not verifying anything independently, but we are seeing stories that in China and other manufacturing countries that some disruptions are still taking place and factories are still being closed. So it's important to understand that we're not out of the woods just yet with these supply chain disruptions. Then we're seeing, of course, the energy price spike. That this is, of course, with all this geopolitical uncertainty, all the situation with the war between Russia and Ukraine, and kind of this proxy war, which is also happening with Russia and the EU and the US. So we have this fear that Russians turning off the taps, basically. In terms of food insecurity, obviously, because food is our primal need, the Ukraine and that part of the world is our bread basket. So a lot of the goods and services that we consume, and even myself as a grocer, it was impossible to get flour, for example, during COVID, and a lot of these oils have doubled, tripled in price. And because of it, the energy prices moving food across borders has become very, very expensive. So there's also one important constant. So if we can resolve all this food insecurity and energy prices can go down through various means, which I'll share with you in the following slides, we still might, be seeing extreme weather conditions. And this is something that's, very close to my heart, and I work with Allia on across the Green Business Program, is that, we're living in a time of economic and environmental change. So the environment is our home, and it is dying, unfortunately. And we're seeing more and more extreme weather conditions, which are affecting our food security as well. So as I mentioned, we have a heavy reliance on food, on food import, and this is affected across the value chain there. And finally, of course, we're seeing historically low interest rates. So another story in the news, like you have seen, is that, of course, rates for mortgages have gone up because the Bank of England is trying to fight off this inflation by raising the interest rates. But we've been living in a period of very historic low interest rates. So as I mentioned in the previous slides, it's been a bit of a time where we've been able to benefit from these low interest rates, but sooner or later reality sinks in, and we have to be aware that because of this is the structure of how our economy is, rates will go back up. And finally, of course, why this is happening is because of this, political uncertainty. So I just remember when I picked up The Economist and I saw this cover, I remembered to include it as a little point, because because we've had this changing situation in Downing Street, where we've seen many prime ministers come and go, different chancellors come and go as well. That's giving that perception to the outside world that we might not have our act together, shall we say? So this is where we need to basically, put in place the right leaders for our government, for our constituencies, and put our best foot forward, I would say. So, are you participating in inflation? I would like you to also think about how you are participating in inflation and how this is affecting you. So, are you participating in inflation in terms of, do you accept, let's say, the prices of these goods going higher, are you still consuming in the same way you would? Is your business still purchasing in the same way that that it was, let's say, 12 months ago? Are you now seeing, maybe this pressure to pay higher wages? And I would like you to start to think about how you can benefit from this in terms of how you position yourself. So traditionally, the ones that will benefit from inflation would be those who have the most amount of debt that's secured with a lower interest rate, because, or debt in terms of payables to suppliers, because the value of your currency now is lower. If you have more debt, you'll technically have more money in that sense. If you've had fixed interest repayments, then also you'll be benefiting from inflation, because compared to other people, you will be paying less. So now is the time to potentially consider about how you want to take advantage of this changing environment, inflationary environment, and begin this negotiation procedure with some of your suppliers, and to put things maybe on your terms, where you can say, okay, the price of goods and services have gone up. Can I lock in certain prices at certain times? Can I pre-buy something from you? Will you give me maybe more credit? So you ask for more things. And these are things that we'll be discussing as well, Will, today in terms of your cash management, but just to plant the seed a little bit in terms of how you can maybe benefit from some of these cost rises. And an example that I love to give is when I was at university in London. I think the price of a Pret coffee was, of course, like £2, and now I can't even afford it. I don't think at 360. And I say, no, I'm not going to participate in this, because basically, the more we are participating, we're creating that demand, we're creating that market for that, and then brands and services and goods and services will be allowed to trade at those levels. So it's like, if you're saying, oh yeah, I can pay £3, £4 for my cup of coffee, then you're also accepting that price. You are a price taker, and you are accepting that price for those goods and services, instead of seeking alternatives or showing demand in another area. So this is another little funny one here, just to show basically, the FTSE in terms of the rational path of how economies function. Often we see periods where we see extreme growth, and then we see the cyclicality effect of, boom and bust, with a rough hangover, whereas we rarely see what we call the rational path, the slow and steady growth, because of the financial system that we're in, and because of all the different factors at play globally in the geopolitical space, and environmental space. We are seeing different peaks and troughs, and this is how the economy functions. So this might not be news to you. You might know this already. However, it's good just to reflect that we live in cycles of boom and bust in the economy. So it's very important to kind of see, okay, where are we now in this cycle? How do I prepare myself to that? Why has this happened today? How am I going to prepare myself to move forward in the next peak or trough? And it's just something to understand that, we can be very short-sighted and think about our immediate needs, which is completely normal, but we have to try and think long-term and say, okay, this is regular, this is normal. How are we going to position ourselves best? So what is being done about all this? I mean, obviously, the prices at 11% and rising is not sustainable. So how can we go about, what is being done, and how can we go about also taking action for this? So the Hackney Council, per se, where we're based, has put forward various measures to try and help residents and business owners. So they have put forward various energy bill support. They've created a WhatsApp for people to reach out to with various direct questions, and they've invested in delivering support for business through partners like Allia. So we're very honored and pleased to be working with the Hackney Council for the last year to help small businesses, with all the challenges, including the cost crisis, directly. So they've invested £2.5 million, and they've continued to make these investments to try and support on the ground directly with businesses. The Hackney Council is also advocating government for fairer business rates and towards a new levy system. So they're proposing to scrap the business rates framework and to put forward basically a levy on businesses. So that's not going through yet, though it is something that they're actively advocating for. So something to be aware of for sure. So, yes, our council is and our councilmen are the direct port of call, but the government itself has tried to put in place some measures to offset some of this inflation as well. And so some of these measures include freezing the business rates multiplier. So you may or may not be aware, depending on the age of your business and how you operate, that the business rates tend to go up year over year. And this is based on multiple factors that you can look at on your own time. But they are proposing basically, and they have put in place, business rate freezes until the year 2023, 2024, which effectively, I know it's not direct cash in your pocket, effectively this will save the ratepayers, the business owners like ourselves, 9.3 billion over the next 5 years. So one little positive, yes, putting a freeze on some things, but it doesn't mean that it's going to a different system yet. It doesn't mean that it's going down. It's just we're not going to raise the business rates. And rates, like I said, increase over time with inflation, with various property values, so on and so forth. They've also put in place measures to cut taxes on average by £330 per person, depending on how you look at it and depending on your tax bracket, so on and so forth. Now, going a little bit back to stagflation there, they've also increased the national living wage. So in response to, the goods and services going up, hopefully we will see higher wages, but within the level which is responsible and in line. Obviously, the national living wage and wages, you could say, are too low to even pay for these goods and services. But again, which goods and services, how do you, how that relates to your business directly, what goods and services are you purchasing, and how that will affect what wages that you can pay your employees, wages you can pay yourself, so on and so forth. They've also put in place the energy caps and the various energy incentives for £350 per household, and that cap's been extended until 2024. So these are some of the measures that are being put in place to hopefully, what we would say, put a timeout on this inflationary pressure, help people by putting some cash in their pocket, so on and so forth. But we are still in a pressure cooker environment. So, inflation will continue. We might see a little bit of a decrease, but generally speaking, there are very little periods. I mentioned there are only 2 periods in the last 20 years where we've seen minor deflationary pressure. So inflation is definitely here to stay, and we must combat inflation through other measures, rising wages, more benefits, however you want to structure that. Total, of course, the government has announced that it's been around £22 billion in direct response, however you want to frame that. In terms of the Bank of England, of course, because the Bank of England is the independent body to our elected government, and they're the ones in charge of the money and setting the interest rates, they have decided to raise interest rates in order to increase the cost of borrowing, so making money more expensive to borrow and make deposits more attractive to foreign investors. And what that means is nobody wants to park their money in a British savings account if the value of their money is not going to be worth as much, and if it's going to devalue their money. So they need to make the pound more attractive by raising interest rates. And this is a similar policy to what's happening in the United States. And the reason why I use the United States as an example is because it's another of the world's biggest economies where a lot of Western investors, of course, place deposits, money, capital, where banks operate and place capital, and where goods and services transact. So what could be your action list? What could be some of the actions that you could take when you relate the economy to your business on more of a macro level? So you could consider to start thinking about how you could modernize your business. How could you put in place different things where you could start saving money? And in our introduction, we hinted at Allia has access to a platform called Secret. And Secret is a great platform which gives you up to 95% off on some of these like SaaS platform programs like HubSpot, MailChimp, so on and so forth. And these are ways where you could basically sign up to it through Secret. We don't get anything from that. And you could basically be saving a lot of money by putting in place maybe some automations in your business, bringing your business more online, so on and so forth. So start to think today about how you could be modernizing your business, because we're not going back in time. Inflation's not going away. We're not going to go back to the Middle Ages just yet. So think about how we could be modernizing our business. A great activity that we go over in the Grow Your Business program is the business model canvas. And if you're not familiar with this concept, I really invite you to go check it out in your own time. I'll put some links in the Craft Resource Bank. But a business model canvas really identifies who your customer is, what your value proposition is, how you're selling your product and service, and it puts that all in one visual place. So really perform and reperform the business model canvas and try to think to yourself, where is the business going? How is this going to be modernizing based on the economy? And of course, bringing your business online to attract new customers is obviously an obvious point, but it's still a dedication of time, which I can respect as a business owner is scarce. So consider changing your place of business. And what I mean by that is, something that we'll talk about later is remaining lean in your business. So reducing possibly your square foot or starting to share some space with somebody else, because as maybe space becomes more expensive, as rates are more expensive, if your business is not growing yet, you need to adapt. You need to adapt your business. You need to find partners or other people who you can work with potentially if your business allows for it. And you can find these ways in tandem with modernizing your business to be lean. And this is something that we'll cover a bit later on today. Another way, of course, which we can think about is really reduce, reuse, and recycle the resources. As the resources that we're buying, that we're paying for, become more expensive, how can we basically put in place these best practices in order to reduce our primary costs? And there are many different examples of doing this out there, different recycling schemes, take back schemes, reducing plastic, and we're very fortunate, I think, now where we are in the more green economy, that goods that used to be more harmful to the environment are now just at the same cost. So like plastics are the same cost as the recyclable materials. So really start to think about how we can start to make the right investments in our business to reduce, reuse, and recycle, and implement these best practices with our employees, with our customers, and try and adapt more of a circular economy approach to be less reliant on outside imports that might be more costly. So definitely take a moment to analyze your own supply chain and think about how this is sustainable in the long run. If we're going to continue to see after Brexit higher import costs, transport costs, now should I start to think about making domestic production a priority, or is there a way I could pivot my product line in a different way? And these are all things that are being forced upon you, unfortunately, by this macro environment. But these are all things that you have to start thinking about. So another example, which I put on my action list here, would be to consider promoting and trying different services which promote this reduce, reuse, recycle mentality and promote less consumption and less waste. And those are services such as Too Good To Go or Allia. Is this something that you can be using in your own household, or is it something you can be using in your own business so that you can basically gain more customers and have a closer knit community, that circular economy approach, and start to change your habits, obviously. So one thing that I mentioned earlier was to talk to your suppliers. Now, obviously, your suppliers, you might not have a direct communication with them. You might not be able to negotiate with them, or you might think you might not be able to. However, you'd be surprised. So I purchase from big wholesalers. And if you do sit down and talk to them and you say, look, it's not going to be possible to do this, I'm going to have to ask for like a 2% discount. And you'd be surprised. They have that wiggle room. They might have that wiggle room depending on, you can make certain promises and certain actions to buy more from them, let's say this year, or give them more of your business, so on and so forth. But remember, everybody along the supply chain has their margin. And some people, of course, have been passing on these inflationary costs to us. And so how can we basically either gain independence from these suppliers and say, hey, well, we can't use you anymore because you're not going to give us a discount, Or how can you start to think about basically cutting out any middlemen and starting to produce yourself potentially and understand how you can sell things made yourself. And I understand that people in the room today, you might be selling goods, you might be selling a service. So start to think how you can diversify your business a little bit and make yourself more resilient in that sense. There's some great hacks, I would say, in Hackney that I've learned about in my time working with the Hackney Council and in Hackney. And I think that really the local economy has a lot to benefit for here, because we must continue to support our local economy, our local entrepreneurs, and shop local, keep those distances shorter, try and see how we can cross-sell, partner, share these resources, share our customers together. And a great way to that is the Love Hackney Shop Local initiative, which you may or may not be aware of, which is an initiative to promote shopping in Hackney. And of course, these are just a few little seeds, because later on, just after lunch at 1 p.m. today, we'll have our growth hacking type of session. So that's really where you'll hopefully have some more tips and tricks to hack your growth. But I really wanted to frame this from more of an inflationary perspective. Then, of course, we also have our budgeting and finance sessions, which will be followed as well. So have a think about this. The choice shouldn't really be to heat or to eat. At the end of the day, we have to adapt to survive, and we have to make the right decisions in our business in order to be independent in terms of either our energy, our supplies, and how we operate to combat these inflationary pressures that we're experiencing. We will not probably see deflation in these sectors. And yes, some of the measures that we're seeing today will put a temporary hold, but we must start to think about how we either have to raise prices or change our business practices in order to be able to do both, heat and eat. And this is something, like I said, I'm pivoting back to one of my my main projects with Allia, which is, going green, and how can we basically the economy and the macro economy, the global economy, if you look at reports and various publications which are being published by the World Bank, so on and so forth, this has been a big quote unquote agenda of them for a while, basically to so that our planet can be sustainable going forward. So this is the next big thing, and getting on with it, trying to adapt and go green is basically the next big thing. So going green is the next big thing. And how are you implementing that in your business? And if you'd love to talk to me more about that, please do. You can join our Green Business Program, which is a 1-day or 2-day seminar format. And you can learn how to put in place your green action plan, reduce your carbon footprint, gain accreditation so that you can gain more customers by being held accountable, and also hopefully reduce costs by implementing green measures as well. Well, that almost ties up what I wanted to speak to you about this morning on this session before we move on to the next session, which will be taking place in a different link. However, I would like to bring to your attention, of course, the different other resources which might be available to you. And these include like I just mentioned, the Allia Green Business Seminar, which will be taking place at the beginning of January. So only a month away, really, between the Christmas break and now. And this is a great opportunity for you to work with us in person directly on some of these initiatives that I just mentioned. Then we also have the Grow Your Business program, which will be also taking place in January. This is a 3-month iteration of the Grow Your Business program. And it's a great opportunity for you to network with other Hackney business owners, really gain those skills with a 2-hour session every week, online or in person. Then finally, I encourage you to also join various networks that might be in your community. An example of that, the Hackney Business Network, but there's also other ones such as Sustainable Hackney and Shop Local, Love Hackney one as well. So by being more invested in your community, hopefully we'll be able to fight off some of these inflationary pressures. And going, being able to either keep our economy circular within and also go beyond our borough by selling online. So, excuse me, I hope that, you enjoyed listening to me today. The deadline, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is the 18th of
That's
December.
correct.
So please, yeah. So please get on and sign up to the Grow Your Business program. If you'd like to have further resources and help from Allia and our partners, we have loads of guest speakers, loads of amazing content that we put out through this program. So with that being said, we have about a few minutes here left. If anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat, and we will go ahead at this point and I think stop the recording, and we will then see you in the next session. Andrew?